Welcome to the UNIfy Festival and this event, Diagnosing Disease, Creating a Pathology Display with Sarah Rawlins. She's the Interpretation Development Manager at National Science and Media Museum in Bradford. And we're going to run through a presentation. I say we, Sarah's going to do it. I have no understanding in this field. Excuse me, at the end, we'll allow questions and comments. And I know that we've got Samar here as well, who I know will be very familiar with this piece of work. It's great that you can join us, Samar. If you want to comment on anything throughout the event, please do so using the chat. And at the end, Sarah will then open up the conversation. But otherwise, I will just hand over to Sarah now, and we will get underway. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Georgie. And also thank you for my recent promotion. I'm not a manager of anything. I'm just an interpretation developer, I'm afraid. So if we can start the slideshow, Georgie, I'm sort of exercising my Chris Whitty rights. So Georgie is going to be doing slides moving on. And now that she has done that, my presentation has disappeared. How do I? There we go. That's that. There we go. Okay. Thank you for coming today, both of you. And I noticed that at least half of the audience is actually already very familiar with this project, but at least it will be a surprise to the other half. I'm Sarah Rawlins. I'm an interpretation developer in the exhibitions team at the Science and Media Museum. The main part of my job is to develop and produce temporary exhibitions and displays within our museum spaces, and sometimes even outside of the museum itself. I'll be talking to you today about one of the displays I worked on in partnership with Dr. Samar Mooney, who I was going to say who some of you might know. One of you will know them very well. I'll be talking a little bit about the museum generally, then doing a little introduction to the foyer space, because I'm not entirely sure how familiar people are with that area, and then the development of the pathology display and how we work together to complete it to a tight timescale. Also, as Georgie said, we'll have some questions at the end. Next slide, please. So the National Science and Media Museum, hopefully you've either visited us or have heard of us, or I suspect possibly who may have worked with us. We are part of the Science Museum Group. So as well as our site in Bradford, we have the Science Museum in London, the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester, the National Railway Museum in York, and Locomotion in Shildon. So the mission of the Science and Media Museum is to explore the transformative impact of image and sound technologies on the world around us. And this covers what we're most famous for: film, photography and television, but it also covers digital content and gaming and sound technologies, so things like mixing desks and recording. So we have 7 galleries across the museum, 5 permanent, so they're there all the time. And then galleries 1 and 2 are used by the exhibition team for the changing exhibition programme. We are also fairly unique in having 3 cinema screens in the building, which are programmed and run by the museum itself. We also work with teams, other teams within the museum, and partners, external partners, to put content in other spaces within the museum and cinema. So in Pictureville Bar, the cafe, the lobby to the Cubby Broccoli screen, and in the foyer area, which is what I will be talking about today. Next slide, please. So for those of you not familiar with the museum, this is the foyer area I'm going to be talking about. So just to orientate you, opposite the bench and display is the staircase which leads up to the IMAX screen. To the left-hand side of the entrance is the security desk and ladies' toilets and the baby change. And on the right-hand side of the entrance is the men's toilets and the disabled toilet. And if you walk straight through this area, keeping the bench on your right-hand side, you will get to the downstairs picnic space. So all this detail is to show you that actually this is a really busy area within the museum. There's a lot of foot traffic due to the toilets and it being a route to the picnic space, obviously. So there are lots of people going backwards and forwards. Plus there's a bench that runs the length of the wall opposite the stairs to the IMAX, means there's actually quite high dwell time with people who are waiting for their screening to start, or they're waiting for someone to come out of the bathrooms. So high dwell time, high foot traffic area. And as you can see from this picture exhibition, it's called Cycling in the City. The museum has decided to put that wall above the bench to good use and developed it into a little changing display space. It holds between 8 to 14 A2 images with their labels and an introductory panel, so people understand what the display is about. These aren't images which are originals. They're not put in frames and glazed. They are reproductions of whatever materials we're wanting to make a display of, and they are put on the wall with Fomex panels. So next slide, please. So initially the foyer display area was actually used for reproductions of photos within the National Science and Media Museum's own collections, such as our extensive Daily Herald archive that holds press images from the Daily Herald newspaper. What we actually gradually started to do was introduce displays of photographs or artworks from community groups, local projects that were happening, artists and other stakeholder groups we work in partnership with. This was an excellent opportunity, and it is an excellent opportunity with us to work with lots of different people and get a range of experiences and voices into the museum who might not be heard usually. Starting with smaller scale visual exhibitions is also theoretically meant to be sort of a less pressured environment to develop something for the museum than a full-scale exhibition, which would probably demand lots of time, lots of meetings, lots of discussion and going backwards and forwards. So this is sort of a way of easing people into how the museum works and how some of the processes happen quite gradually. It also helps us to deepen partnerships by sort of understanding the goals and aspirations of partners who we were working with, like what are they wanting to get out of this, of these foyer displays, and it also helps us to understand how other people work. We can always improve our working practices. We also, when we're working on the IMAX foyer area, when we're working with groups, we tailor our support to what the group needs and wants. So while some groups are really happy to take the lead on this and select their own images and write panels and labels, and they're really confident in doing that, they're really, really wanting to do that on their own, that's absolutely fine by us. We can sort of take a few steps backwards and maybe give them a few hints and tips if they need it, but we can let them get on with it and just come back for a few meetings. Others prefer to have a more collaborative approach. Maybe it's because they have never done anything like this before. They're not quite sure of the steps that need to be taken. So we can work more closely with them, selecting images, helping them write text for labels or introductory panels, helping them draft things, and then helping them with the editing. So sending it between rounds of editing between us. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so I had a look back at my emails to see how this project sort of started, and it got started back in sort of September, October 2019, when Samar, who was the director at that time of the Digital Health Enterprise Zone at the University of Bradford, contacted the museum about the possibility of working on something for National Pathology Week, which is obviously big week celebrating pathology, that's run out of the Royal College of Pathologists, and that always runs in November. So all exhibition ideas, even for these small scale foyer displays, have to actually go through a Science Museum group wide selection process, because there's actually a possibility that more than one museum in the group might be interested in developing the idea and then hosting the exhibition. So the original idea that was submitted was to talk about digital pathology. So the scanning and sending of a digital copy of a pathology slide, plus the development of AI to analyse the scanned slides, and then its actual development of use in the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes when individuals approach us with an idea, they tend to sort of ask us quite close to the time the event's going to happen, which doesn't tend to give us a long enough lead-in time. And, you know, if you don't work with museums, that's completely normal to do that, because how do you know, if you've never worked with a museum before, how do you know how long it takes to get things up and running? We're more than happy to talk to people and have a chat with them once they come with us to an idea. But you know, if you have no idea what the processes are, you don't really know when you should be approaching people. So at the meeting in October, Samar was let know that we absolutely did want to work with her on this, and it would be an absolutely brilliant display. Really excited about it, and that there would be quite a short time frame for us to put something together for November. So actually, could we then work towards the proposal for National Pathology Week in November 2020? Because we would have lots of time to work on it. We could make it really brilliant, really slick. And besides, what could possibly go wrong between October 2019 and 2020? What could possibly happen? Next slide, please. Well, we all kind of know what happened in 2020. I would say these things happen, but this is such an extraordinary event. Yeah, we didn't realise that would happen. So, next slide, please. If you are looking at the slide, challenges to completion, and I hope you are, I think this is probably a very redundant slide, because I think we can all imagine what the challenges to completing a project like this were, because no doubt we've had our own challenges to things we were trying to complete in 2020. But I will do sort of a quick rundown of the main ones and the impacts that they had. So firstly, obviously, was lockdown. We were all told to stay at home and work at home if we could do. Luckily, the exhibition team can do a lot of their work from home. But what we were doing was trying to get sort of grips with unfamiliar technology, or at least we were in the Media Museum, because the rollout of Teams was actually only just happening. And before that, we were still doing a lot of our meetings and discussions in person. So trying to suddenly get to grips with video calling and working from home was a little bit of a new thing for us. Secondly, obviously, because of lockdown, the museum was closed to the public initially, and then once it became clear that we wouldn't be opening anytime soon, we went into a complete shutdown for a period of time. So the building was completely mothballed. They turned off the electricity, they turned off the water, only security staff were in there making sure everything was secure. But apart from that, we were all told to stay at home, stay away. So reopening to staff was gradual, according to the government guidelines. That started to happen over the summer in 2020. And then a bit later on, there was a period of time where we were again open to the public before we then went back into lockdown again. So we were working to reduced hours as well when we were open, because the museum is now closed 2 days a week on Monday and Tuesday. And there was also the possibility that the museum could close at any time again as government guidance changed. And as we'll see a bit later, that did actually happen. So the uncertainties of lockdown and rules around what could and couldn't be open meant that a large number of staff in the museum were put on furlough while the building was closed. And sort of certain functions weren't running, as I mentioned before, or needed really reduced staffing levels. So what that actually meant was a large proportion of work in the public programme, which the exhibitions team work on, was put on hold because the building was shut, wasn't going to be open, there were no staff there. Seemed a little bit bleak at the time. I was just explaining to Georgie that the project I was working on at the time was meant to open in summer 2020, and that's now been bumped, and it's opening now in July this year. So lots of work moved around. So I was put on furlough for actually quite a long period of time. And that meant when I was brought back to pick up work on the foyer display, it was actually September 2020. And that meant we were actually working to a significantly shorter time scale to get the project completed than we perhaps normally might have done, because the project itself had a deadline, an absolute deadline of the 2nd of November, because that's when National Pathology Week starts. It has to be in place, the foyer display we wanted, it had to be in place for the start of that week. So when the museum doors were open, people could come in and look at it. That was a fixed deadline, we couldn't change that. So what we had to do, just get down and get on with it. And finally, and most importantly, was sort of the stresses within the NHS. So at this point, SMA had actually got a new job and was going to be working in the NHS at Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, and so was sort of undergoing sort of a transitional period where she was sort of finishing up work in Bradford and then doing part of the week in Sheffield as well. So as well as being between 2 different cities, she's then moving back to working within the NHS. And a colleague who I only know as Steve was also going to be helping us with some of the image collection for this project. So I can't even begin to imagine the stress that both SMA and Steve must have been under, working in the NHS under pandemic conditions. So I needed to make sure that when we're working in partnership, this was actually a project that they still wanted to deliver and had a capacity to do that within their workloads. I didn't want to damage their well-being or place them under extra strain, because producing this piece of work would obviously be an extra thing to place on top of everything else that they were doing at the time. And as it turned out, unfortunately, Steve was not able to help us anymore, which is completely understandable, that he could no longer do that. He had taken little time to respond to questions about whether he was still wanting to take part. So again, that reduced the time frame a bit more before we got clarification on what was happening. So in the end, we had from, according to my emails, from around the 12th of October to the 26th of October to write, edit and design up the content so it could meet the print deadline, because you generally have to leave about a week to get it sent off to be printed and get it back in time. Okay, next slide, please. So we fully understood that Steve was no longer able to help us with the foyer display. So the issue around that was that they were the contact who was going to provide information and images around the aspect around Alzheimer's disease. And so that meant we would need to completely sort of refocus the display from the original proposal that we had sent in to the steering group, which actually happens more than you think when you suddenly start researching exhibitions and stuff. So this wasn't actually anything that was new or particularly surprising, to be honest. So what SMA and I did was we arranged a discussion to see what photographs we would be able to use or to collect in time, and from that, from looking at what material do we actually have at this point in time, see what stories we would be able to tell from them. So what do you have, what is it telling you here? This is always actually a really good first step if you're designing any exhibition. Assess what you have and what stories it's telling you, and then you can take it from there. And actually from this, having a little bit of a conversation, working out what there was, we decided that actually perhaps we needed to start a little bit simpler for our visitors. And most people, and absolutely including myself in this, don't really know what happens to biopsy samples once they are taken and how they are actually then analysed by pathologists to diagnose what diseases they have. Tissue samples are taken for a huge variety of reasons to diagnose disease. A huge variety of processes they can do that. A lot of people will have undergone this at some point in their life. So actually we thought it would be a really excellent way to increase our visitors' knowledge around science, what we call their science capital, by helping them to actually understand the process of, right, okay, now we've taken your sample, this is what happens to it. So digital pathology was still going to be included as part of the process in the later stages where we're going to talk about samples being scanned, sent out and analysed, but it was part of the larger whole of the exhibition, and we weren't just going to focus on one disease. So essentially what we were doing was refocusing the exhibition onto the journey of a pathology sample, which I, produced in the end of really, really strong exhibition. I'm really pleased with it. So in addition to this, during the lockdown, the Science and Media Museum had increased its digital output. So while we were closed, people could still access information and engage with the museum. Our blogs and social media content increased, and things that were previously done in person, such as festivals, exhibitions and displays, were moved online. So while we were always planning to have a physical hard copy go in the foyer space, which I showed you earlier, we were also going to run a parallel digital exhibition online for visitors who couldn't access the museum. So it would be all of the labels, including the panels, the information and the pictures, and it would also feature an animation on digital pathology that had been made the previous year by a group from the University of Bradford's MA Media and Design and Technology students. We also popped a little QR code on the introductory panel that would take any visitor in person to the animation, which was online, so they wouldn't miss out. So refocusing the point of the exhibition and running a parallel digital exhibition on the website. Next slide, please. So once we developed the new idea for the display, Samar sent through the existing photographs which illustrated the actual steps the sample goes through. I believe these were from previous pathology outreach projects that she had undertaken. And it was from those that we discussed about what processes were absolutely necessary to show with a photograph, and which could perhaps be mentioned in a label alongside another photo. So for example, the little photo I've got here on this slide is a sample which is embedded in a paraffin block being sliced very, very thinly so that they can be put onto a slide to be examined. So the label talks about this process happening. It then also mentions that the samples are floated in a water bath, so it's easier to attach them to the glass slide. But we didn't show a photo of the water bathing process. We did this to improve the flow of information so that there were enough stages to make sense and understand the process, but that we weren't overwhelming people with too much detail about what was happening. It was just the main major steps in the process. We also, at this stage, emailed Panakia Technologies just to get a photograph of their AI system, which we used for one of the photos, just because we were going to talk about digital pathology and AI a little bit, so we talked to them. So we were just deciding the content and then collecting it all together. There was a slight issue with some of the photographs we already had, in that they were actually not high enough resolution for blowing up to A2 for print, because they became slightly more pixelated than we would have liked. They didn't look so crisp and clear. The solution to that was actually that Sheffield teaching hospitals actually agreed to let SMAR go into the Path Lab and take photo of all these processes happening, which is actually really, really kind of them, because again, they're really busy, it's a pandemic situation, but they let SMAR go in, and actually the staff members who were undertaking all of these processes were really kind to let her take their photos. And actually this was actually really, really brilliant, because the new photos turned out even better than we expected, because they showed lots of people working in the lab doing the different jobs, each of the stages the sample went through. And that actually was really important because it reminded viewers and visitors that it's not just the pathologist that does the work in diagnosing disease. A huge team comes together to do different specialized jobs in the process, which was, it was really important for us to show that actually it was a really big group effort. There's a big team doing this, and they're all working together to diagnose people's diseases and help them get the right treatment. Taking our own photos also meant that we could take 2 or 3 photos of the same thing and then choose the one that was the best. So, for example, one of the stages for the second photo in the series was about cutting up biopsy samples. And we had to be, I had to be quite careful not to be choosing one that was too graphic, because one had actually quite large biopsy samples in the little cassettes, and that might have upset people a little bit, but also you have to think about the ethics around showing human tissue. So we chose one which was less graphic, if I can put it that way. And each photo absolutely had to be checked carefully to see that there was no identifying data on any of the labels and forms and computer screens, in line with the Data Protection Act. So we selected photos that didn't have any of this information on, or if there was, it could be really easily blurred out. So it couldn't be read, couldn't be seen at all. We had to be really careful with that. So then, after we got the photos together, Samar sent some information about each photo generally, about what was happening, and I drew up a first draft of the text. And then that was edited and fact-checked by Samar and colleagues in both the museum on our side and Sheffield Teaching Hospitals. And it was from this editing stage that it's actually suggested we might want to pop in a few more images of what the samples actually looked like through a microscope. So a microscope, or if you got a scanned image of the slide, that's what a pathologist would be looking at on their computer screen, because they suggested that that's what people would be interested in. So what does a pathologist see? What's it showing? And how do you know if something's wrong from looking at that? And these images, when we added them in, actually brought the display full circle, as it did really finish the journey of a sample off really nicely. It's gone all the way through the process of being put into a sample, being put into a slide, it's being sent to a pathologist, and then the last few images were like, if I'm a pathologist, this is what I'm seeing. They actually have their own interest as well, because they look really, really attractive, with all the shapes and different colours. They have their own beauty in a way. They're really nice images. I think a couple of slides back we had a little picture of one of those of a cerebellum. And so once the drafts had gone backwards and forwards a bit with the editing process and was signed off, they went to be drawn up into a print copy by the designer, and then they went off to print. So quick turnaround doing that. So next slide, please. So good news. There is good news in this story, that by working together really closely in keeping lines of communication open, being able to catch up as many times as was sort of practicable with both jobs, working together, the foyer display was completed in time. We got it meeting its print deadline, and it was printed and came back, and we managed to get it installed and launched online for the start of National Pathology Week on the 2nd of November. It was advertised in both Media Museum newsletters and social media, and the Royal College of Pathology also advertised it through their channels and networks and put it in their newsletter as well. Really some very strong advertising done around the display, and that was something I was really pleased about. A lot of people seem to really pick it up and run with it. And next slide, please. Even more good news was actually that on the day of the install, I actually got to meet Dr. Bette Mooney. I got to meet Samar in person at a suitable distance, as the photo shows from the tweet. We'd only ever spoken on the phone or via a video chat. So it was actually lovely to meet in real life. And even better news was that Samar, as she has told me, and I fully believe her, was very, very happy with the display and really excited to see it in situ. She made a short video about it, which I've sort of put a little copy of the tweet there using the Pathology Week hashtag. So there was a little video as well going out. The second tweet really shows what we wanted to get across in the display in the online exhibition. Not only what happens to a pathology sample, but also that there is a team involved in processing and helping to diagnose people, and it's a large team within the NHS, and we really wanted to say thank you for that and to highlight the work that they did. So next slide, please. The bad news, so there's a little bit of bad news with the good, was that the day after I put it up, we were told we were going back into lockdown on the Thursday of that week. And because we were closed Monday and Tuesdays, the hard copy on the walls would only be visible to the public for one day before it would be shut. And the building has been closed to the public ever since, unfortunately. So this is actually, so not all bad news. This is where the online exhibition was vital, because it contained all the content from the physical display, plus the animation about digital pathology from the MA students, and it could still be viewed online. So as I said, entirely bad news, I guess, but it just shows you how important those online functions really are. It was, next slide, please. The online offer was actually key to allowing our public programme to go ahead, certainly in the terms of this foyer display, when the museum couldn't be accessed by visitors. The online exhibition had exactly the same content as was on the walls, and it went live on the 2nd of November at the start of Pathology Week, and as I said, it was advertised by social media. I've put two little screenshots on the page. So at the top is the banner image. Again, it's the cerebellum. It seems to be a really popular image from the pathology slides. It just looks so lovely, with the swirling shapes and the colours. So that's the banner image in the top lines of the introduction. And the image slightly below it is from the exhibition, where images and their labels were on a slideshow, so visitors could just click their way through those. I've popped the web address in, you can have a look at the page, it's still live. It is still there. And as you can see, the first image from the exhibition was the slide, the pathology samples are checked in, and there's a lovely group of people from the NHS working away there. Next slide, please. So the good thing about the foyer display, being online only, is that we can actually pull really accurate metrics for visiting engagement from the system. And this allows us to work out what our content has been like, whether it's been successful, and it helps us to forward plan other online activities. So I've popped in the metrics for digital pathology. So in total, the page had 919 views. And the high point came on the 12th of November, when there are 105 views in one day. Now, this might not sound like incredible numbers. You'd think, oh, well, you get loads more than that. But it's actually worth mentioning that people spent an average of 4 minutes and 3 seconds on that individual page. And that's actually really, really good when you consider that the average time spent on a visit to the whole site, so the average time people spent on the whole of the Media Museum website during the same period, was 2 minutes and 11 seconds. So it suggests that people who were interested in the exhibition were actually exploring it in some depth, because they actually spent double the average time of a visit to our website looking at this material. We actually can pull separate statistics for the animation as well. The video did really, really well. It got 620 views and 5.5 thousand impressions, with a quick click-through rate of 5%. Not entirely sure what that means. I was sent these by our online manager, who deals with all the websites, but she reassures me that while 5% click-through rate sounds a bit low, it's actually really good, because our channel average for things that we put on YouTube has a click-through average of 4.3%. So again, the film has outperformed other things on our website on average. The average watch time was 2 minutes and 8 seconds. And considering the film itself was actually 3 minutes and 36 seconds, actually is very good, because people tend to start watching things and then not watch the whole way through. So actually 2 minutes just over 2 minutes. It's actually really, really good. We're happy with these numbers. We're really happy with them, because although it may not indicate really, really heavy traffic to the site, the length of time spent per visit and watching the film shows a really high engagement with the content, shows that we're putting out a quality offer that people are interested in. I think it also probably shows you that people sometimes think that digital content's a little bit of a sticking plaster, and you go, oh, just stick something out on digital, put it on the website, it's fine. When in actual fact, it's much more difficult to get people engaged and wanting to read stuff and wanting to look at stuff. So this actually did really, really well. And so next slide, please. After I wrote this title, I realized it actually sounded a little bit sarcastic if you just read it out loud. But genuinely, we love foyer displays. We love them in our museum. It brightens up a space within an area that gets a lot of people coming through, gets people looking at things, gives them a taster of lots of different subjects, things they perhaps might not have seen before. It means we can talk to lots of smaller groups, get them dipping their toe into working with the museum. You know, it's a really positive force for us, working collaboratively with lots of different people. And we love having them. We love talking to people and developing them. So due to lockdown, the section of the website where we ask people to send in display ideas is currently closed. However, I'm really confident that that's going to open up again soon, because we have for 2022 a big foyer display space, and as far as I know, we don't really have many displays planned in for that, and we would love to put some more in and have them change more frequently. So I am sure that suggestions box is going to open back up again, and I am more than happy to discuss ideas relating to sound and light technology and projects which use photography, or if you did a community group with them and you want to talk about what your community group does, I'd happy to receive them and talk to people. And all I will say, that next slide, my contact details are here if you want to get in touch with me about this exhibition, about any of the exhibitions we do, or if you have an idea about any foyer displays you might like to do in future. And all I will say now is, Georgie, it's back over to you. And does anybody have any questions? Which is the final slide, questions. But if anyone wants to have this, more people have turned up. I thought I was still speaking to 2 people. Never mind. So yes, there might be some of you who have a fantastic idea for a foyer display. Speak to us, speak to me. We really love to hear from people. We love working with new people, getting more people involved in the museum, and getting the museum involved with more groups in Bradford, getting us involved with Bradford itself.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah. I mean, that was just a really fascinating insight. I don't think I'd ever considered before the complexity of putting an exhibition together, and one, interpreting the data of suggested exhibitions, but then working with partners and the need to change and adapt as things go throughout the partnership. I just thought it was a really sort of fascinating insight to that. We've got some comments coming in. Would Samar like to talk a little bit about what it's like working with the museum? I think we've got about 5 minutes left of this event. We're whipping through time. Samar. Oh, perhaps not. She's come into the chat saying, I definitely recommend working with Sarah and the team at the National Science and Media Museum. So you can't ask for more than that, I don't think, Sarah. Glowing recommendation. No, I'm sorry, Samar, we can't hear you, but it does say that you're unmuted, so I'm not sure why that's happening. Juliet's joined us. She's a new student to the University of Bradford, and it's lovely to hear about the work. And I was just reflecting there as well, Sarah, that I don't think we've really sort of communicated with our students about the opportunities at the Media Museum, and I'm sure there'd be some students that would have some really interesting ideas, maybe not all commissionable and able to be developed, but you never know.
Well, I'm always of the opinion that you just come and talk to us about it if you've got ideas, if you've got things you want to do, because you know, we might not go forward with something exactly as you've suggested, but for sometimes there's always the kernel of something that you can develop. You know, your idea might not be fully formed, but come and speak to us about it, and we can have a chat, and maybe something might come out of it. We might be able to develop into something like a foyer display, or it might be that what you're talking about could actually make up a section of an actual a temporary exhibition. So we often get groups to so local groups involved in permanent display work. So when we did our exhibition about space called Hello Universe, a lot of local groups, they sort of donated pictures. We could use them on walls. We made films including them. So all of these sort of things, you know, just come and talk to us. We just love talking to people, and we love ideas. I'm always as I said, always of the opinion you can, you know, there's an idea somewhere, you can develop it, you can make it. It might not come out straight fully formed, but please do come along. And also, if you're interested, you know, there are sometimes, you know, different jobs within the learning team and front of house and in the cafe and stuff. There's also volunteering opportunities within the museum if anyone's interested in them, in various departments as well.
Yeah, definitely. So Juliet, welcome to Bradford as a new student. We're really pleased to have you, but do, in May when it reopens, do get down to the Media Museum if you're not familiar with it, and if you've got any ideas, you know, Sarah's there. Oh, so Samar's just added in. I'm so sorry we can't hear you, Samar. What a real shame. Saying that she learned a huge amount about how content is created and to a high standard. It was also a good way of developing written content that is understandable to lay people. And I think, I mean, you know, slightly different world, but in the engagement events world that I work in, that way to communicate in different ways so that it appeals to all, it's really important, and it's a really tricky thing to do. And it sounds like you've just absolutely nailed it with this exhibition. And I suppose I'd just like to reflect on the sort of digital side of it. It became as a result of COVID, but is that something that you think will be a legacy for after? There is going to be an after COVID, right? Everyone agrees with that.
In the after times. Yeah, absolutely. I think what it actually has taught us, and also a lot of other museums, as I mentioned before, is actually sort of reflecting on being able to put out quality content, not just rushing to put things out and panicking slightly. You actually have to have good reason for putting out the content that you do, and it again has to be of a certain standard. So at the start, visitors to websites and stuff were perhaps slightly more understanding if, you know, you could tell videos were being recorded on mobile phones and stuff. But as it moved on, sort of, I think people did expect sort of slightly higher quality content. But I think certainly a lot of activity will be either entirely digital or will have a digital element to it. So definitely when we held some of our festivals, and we also held in December time, we actually held an international conference online, which was hosted by the museum around sound and sound technologies. That actually had more people coming to it than obviously if it was an in-person event. And we had people from all around the world coming and being able to access our events, finding out about us. So actually, I think for a lot of people, it's genuinely increasing accessibility. Certainly, I think anything that perhaps was in person before regarding those sort of things, we'll try and do an online version of it as well, just to increase content.
Yeah, and those benefits of being able to really evaluate the data and the engagement with it, because like the foyer, I can't even imagine how you evaluate a foyer engagement, because it's such a public and open space, which is what brings such value to it.
Yeah, I mean, there are sort of counters on the door, so we know how many people are coming out. And I think sometimes you can sort of position somebody with a clipboard who will either do some counting for an hour or will stop people and ask them some questions as part of our audience research. But sometimes for an open space like that, the numbers can be a little bit fuzzy. I think generally the numbers on the doors are quite reliable for the numbers using that concourse
Of
going
course,
up and
yeah.
down, because it is on the, genuinely, it's on the way to the toilets. Everyone stops there sooner or
Everyone
later.
needs a toilet
It
at some
does
point.
have quite a heavy footfall, and it does have quite a large dwell time, because obviously with the space of the benches, and people are like, oh, well, we'll just meet you outside the toilets. It's
Absolutely,
also a
yeah.
place where a lot of school groups queue up before they get back on the coach to leave again. So we have a lot of children looking at the displays as well, which is lovely.
Great, great. Well, we've actually gone 2 minutes over time there. I do
Apologies.
apologise for people. But thank you so much to Dr. Sarah Rawlins and Samara. I'm sorry we couldn't join you in the comments, but it was
Yes.
a really fantastic oversight into your work, and I just found it really fascinating. And thank you so much for people engaging in the chat. And it sounds like you've got someone who might want to connect with you in Juliet, one of our new students on one of our new
Absolutely.
courses as well. So that's fantastic. So I'll say thank you to everyone for joining us today, and hope you all enjoy the rest of the UNIfy Festival.
No,
Take
thank
care.
you. Thank you for having me.
Cheers.